The klaxons died like a severed nerve. In their place came voices, clipped, formal, wrong in the ringing air of the arena. Secure the asset. Section 4 priority. No civilian contact. Elias knelt in the dust where the trial mech had fallen. His lungs scraped for air. His ears still rang with the shriek of tearing metal, with the echo of that impossible silence when the void had opened around him. The crowd's roar blurred to a flat murmur. Gold-armored boots hit the fractured floor. Not medics, no stretchers. No one checked the opponent he had shredded out of the sky. Hands seized his arms, jointed metal-backed gloves. The grip drove needles of pain through his shoulders. On your feet. He tried. His legs shook, not quite his own. Adrenaline had burned out, leaving ash and tremor. His left hand was still curled, as if the controls of the trial cockpit clung to his fingers. Mira, he rasped. It came out as grit. Restraints engaged, someone said. Cold bands snapped around his wrists. They tightened until heat flushed his fingers. A tiny hum ran through the metal, deep inside the bones. He felt the technology tasting his pulse. He fought to turn his head, to find the blue scrap of cloth he knew she'd tied around her wrist for luck. They'd laughed about it that morning, called it a charm against the mandate's hunger. He heard her first. Elias. Her voice cut through the blur in sharp, broken shards. Young, raw, his heart kicked. He lurched, dragging the guards half a step. Hold, an officer snapped. They wrenched his arms higher. White pain flared, hot and bright. The arena tilted. I'm here. He saw her then, forcing herself between two stanchions of the barricade. Thin shoulders, tangled dark hair. The blue scarf whipping, bright even under the harsh arena lights. For a moment the world snapped into focus. The cracked concrete, the smear of blood that might be his, the thin line of tension in Mira's jaw. All of it anchored by that strip of cloth, sky-colored in a place that had never seen a real sky. Elias dragged air into his chest. Mira? He took one step toward her. The guards reacted like a single animal, arms locked down on him. Another figure in gold moved between them, visor blank. Civilian, return to your seat. She's my sister, Elias said. His voice came out low and ragged. Let her. She is not authorized for contact, the officer said. The voice had the polished accent of the upper tiers. You have been selected. Do not resist. Selected, as if he'd won a prize. Mira pushed again, her hands stretched out through the gap, fingers thin, dirty, nails chewed. The scarf slid loose from her wrist with the motion and fluttered forward like it wanted to come to him instead. Elias, her voice broke on his name. He lunged, the restraints bit. Something tore in his shoulder. For half a heartbeat, his fingertips brushed the scarf's frayed edge. Then a boot came down. The blue disappeared under polished gold, ground into the dirt of the arena floor. When the boot lifted, the cloth stuck to the tread like something dead. No, the sound ripped out of him, raw as flayed skin. A gauntlet clamped over his mouth. Quiet, asset. Over the edge of the glove he saw Mira's face, her eyes wide and bright with wet, her mouth still moving. He couldn't hear her now. Crowd noise filled the space again, distant and useless. Some cheered, some shouted in protest. None could reach. Her hand stayed outstretched, empty now. That was the last thing he saw before they turned him, before her small figure vanished behind the broad backs of the guards and the flat gold of their armor. The world narrowed to the press of bodies, the grind of boots, the chemical stench of mandate sealant. He swallowed blood and dust under the glove. The words never reached air, but they burned his throat anyway. I'm sorry. The transition stole his time. One blink, there was sky, where the lie of it, gray under the dome, above the arena. Next blink, white ceiling, a soft, constant hum, cold pressing against his bare arms. Sedation, he realized. The thin chemical float still clung to his thoughts like mist. He lay on a smooth bench in a small cell. No seams in the walls, no window. Everything white and too bright. Mandate sigils embossed in repeating patterns, gold on white, an old god's teeth. He tried to sit up. The world tilted but held. His wrists still wore restraint bands, now fixed to a rail at his sides. There was no slack. Subject consciousness level, adequate, a disembodied voice said. Not human, calm, female cadence attached to metal indifference. The far wall shifted from solid to shimmering, a transparent barrier. Beyond it, narrow passage, no people. Something whirred at his left. A jointed arm slid from a slot in the ceiling. It held a needle cluster that glinted sterile and hungry. Elias tensed. No. His voice was stronger here, the echoes tight and flat. The arm ignored him. It pressed the needles to his neck with precise pressure. A cool sting. Another cluster found the inside of his elbow. Warmth drew away, slow and draining. Tissue samples acquired, the voice said. Blood panel initiated. He watched dark red spiral up a clear tube and vanish. The sight made him lightheaded in a different way. Like they weren't taking blood, but something thinner and stranger. Time or luck. Another arm scanned him in a grid, light flickering blue over his skin. The band at his wrist vibrated once in answer. Data passing. He tested the restraints. Pulled slow, then fast. No give. The bands hummed with soft warning, biting into bone. Not a guest then. Not a hero. Property. He closed his eyes. Behind them flared the image of the blue scarf under the soldier's boot. For a second, he felt cloth against his fingers again. Felt the knot Mira had tied around his wrist once, when they were younger, to stop him from drifting too far along the rustway tracks. Stay where I can reach you, she'd ordered, small and fierce. He had promised. The restraints hummed again, sensing strain. He let his muscles go slack. The humming eased. Transport commencing, the voice said. Sedation will be applied. No, he said again. Useless word. Cool flooded his veins. The ceiling dissolved to white blur. He dreamed of the scarf uncrumpling itself, slipping free of tread marks and grime, and wriggling like a living thing back through corridors and ducts. It found her wrist again, wrapped tight, a circle unbroken. They woke him with chemicals instead of kindness. Consciousness snapped back in choking coughs. He hung upright now, bands at wrists and ankles attached to a frame. Air blasted over his skin in hard jets, hot, then freezing, then prickling with invisible grit. Decontamination in progress, the same neutral voice said. His skin crawled as if 1,000 tiny hands scraped away layers of the rust. The nano-scrub left no mark, but he felt thinner somehow, less himself. A sour tang filled his mouth. Chemicals. Burnt ozone. The jets cut. For 3 heartbeats there was only silence. Thick. Deep. No city roar. No smog filter hum. Nothing. Clean air slid into his lungs. It tasted wrong. Almost sweet. The bands released from the frame. He staggered. A guard caught his elbow and shoved him forward before he could fall. They walked through narrow halls that bent too neatly. Everything gleamed. Corners sharp, floors smooth, banners precise on the walls. Mandate gold, academy silver, a colder tone. Other kids, no, assets now, moved in groups under escort. Some older, some his age or younger, fresh from other trials. Some looked at him outright, eyes wide. Others glanced and then looked away, as if not seeing him was safer. He caught hissed words as he passed. That's him. Void step, they said. Rustborn, look at his hair. Don't look. The whisper slid along the keen air like thin knives. The label lodged in him. Void step. They had seen it then, the moment the world had peeled sideways in the cockpit. The black edge that had opened and let him cut through space like water. He had felt it, like a river under thin ice. Old, cold, waiting. He hadn't thought the Mandate believed in that kind of thing. Not really. Not the way the Rust slums believed in mirrors that stole names and tracks that remembered footsteps. They reached a vast gate. Its metal looked almost translucent, like frozen light. It slid open without a sound. Beyond lay the academy. It rose in angles and towers, surfaces that caught the pale sun and threw it back silver. Gardens traced lines between buildings with impossible precision. Not a leaf out of place. No trash, no rust, no smell of oil or fry smoke. Elias's chest tightened. It was beautiful, in the way a polished blade was beautiful. The scarf memory tugged at him again, blue against broken concrete, color in a place of grime. Here, the only colors came from banners and controlled flowers. Nothing wild. He didn't feel awe. He felt exposed, like a stain on a white shirt. The guard shoved him on, They funneled the new arrivals into a round chamber dug into the heart of the complex. The amphitheater swallowed them. Seats rose in concentric rings above a central floor. The light came from above, cold and bright, making every face look flat and pale. Mandate banners hung like verdicts. The floor itself was a hollow screen, cycling through images of past trials. Champions, the announcers had called them back home. Pilots in sleek suits, helmets under arms, their mechs towering behind them like loyal gods. Elias watched the parade of faces. None had rust-brown skin like his. None wore scrap metal bracelets or threadbare boots. Their eyes held something hard and easy at once: ownership of place. A tall hologram flickered to life in the center. Administrator by the cut of his uniform. Too perfect, too smooth. Light made into authority. Welcome, selected assets, the projection said. You have been granted the privilege of mandate service. The word privilege hung in the cold air. The speech rolled on. Duty, honor, sacrifice, the expected litany. But woven through the shining phrases came legal language, dense and careful. By participating in and surviving mandate-sanctioned combat trials, you have ceded all terrestrial citizenship claims. All Rustborn qualifiers are thereby designated property class under subsection 12 of the Pilot Acquisition and Containment Act. Your names, family ties, and prior affiliations are recorded as background context only and do not confer rights or expectations. The words pricked, each clause like a small cut. Elias stared at the holoscreen until the administrator's features blurred. His mind skated away, back to a cramped room above the noodle stall, Mira's hair smelling of spices and smoke, the blue scarf drying on the line. Don't do it, she had said when the recruiters came. Her small hands had twisted in the cloth. They'd needed the credit chits. They'd needed a miracle. He had told her he would win, that winning was the only way out. He didn't remember any clause about becoming property. A uniformed attendant approached each asset in turn, holding a sleek device. When it reached Elias, the attendant didn't meet his eyes. Hold out your left arm, she murmured. He did. The device touched the skin just above his wrist. A sharp sting, then a spreading heat. Like ink, but under the skin. Identification shard placed, the attendant said automatically. Tag, E17-4K, confirmed. He felt it settle there, a tiny foreign weight in his flesh. A second pulse, faint and mechanical, under his own. They had given him a new name without sound, a code that would answer to them better than he ever could. Mira used to draw spirals on his wrist with dull chalk when they were bored, saying it was a ward, a guard against bad luck. He imagined the chalk-lined spirals rising under the shard, arguing with it. The administrator's hologram blinked out. The overhead lights flared, then dimmed. The induction was done. Before he could think of what that meant, 2 guards clamped bands back around his wrists. Asset E17-4K, one said briskly. Captain Shea requires immediate assessment. They marched him out, away from the other new arrivals. No one stopped them. No one questioned why one Rustborn was peeled from the herd. As he left, the hollow floor flickered. For a second, the image was of his own trial, his mech a scorched blur, leaping into a slit of blackness, the world bending. The crowd in the amphitheater hissed, murmured, leaned forward. Then it changed, and he was gone. The interrogation room had no illusions. Table, 2 chairs, walls the color of bone, a ring of small black orbs embedded near the ceiling, each a quiet eye. A palm-sized device on the table pulsed with green light, keeping time with his heart. They sat him, locked his cuffs to a loop bolted in the floor. The air smelled faintly of metal and something sharp. She entered without ceremony. Silver uniform, short dark hair, skin the pale shade of those who had always breathed filtered air. Her eyes were the unsettling part. Not the color, a cold gray, but the way they measured, as if every glance took something apart and labeled it. Captain Rylan Shea, she said. No rank flourish. The name landed like a file dropped onto a stack. She did not offer her hand. Instead, she walked a slow circle around him, boots soundless on the floor. Elias kept his gaze on the table, on the green pulse. You are Elias Thorne, she said. Rust Sector 12, age 18 if the records are accurate. He said nothing. She stopped at his shoulder, Do you understand what you are, Mr. Thorne, and to whom you belong now? The question cut deeper than it should have. He swallowed. I'm a pilot. Her amusement was a breath against his ear. You are an anomaly. The Mandate owns anomaly-class assets. That means you belong to us. She stepped in front of him and leaned back against the table, arms loosely folded. Casual, dangerous. Let's begin with the void step, she said. The words sat strangely in her precise accent, like a superstition forced into court language. Describe what you felt. Every detail. Start when your mech was about to be destroyed. The memory rose whether he wanted it or not. The cockpit shaking, alerts screaming, the enemy's plasma arc arcing in, nowhere to go, and then elsewhere. The world thinned, he said slowly, like the air turned to glass and cracked. I saw lines, paths, dark. He groped for words. Russ Tales spoke of shadow roads and ghost rails. He didn't know the Mandate term. There was a place between places. I stepped there, just for a second. You stepped there, she repeated, on instinct, with no previous exposure to prime matter bleed fields. When did you last encounter prime matter at all? We don't have that in the Rust. His lip curled without his permission. We have smog and scrap, bad wiring, no prime matter. She watched his face as he spoke, notes flickering in her eyes. No contact with Mandate research personnel before the trial? No unlicensed mentors? No one taught you such maneuvers? It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. No one taught me. I just didn't want to die. Fear is a potent teacher. She shifted, the device on the table adjusting its pulse. Do you hear anything when you step? Any voices, rhythms? His skin prickled. He thought of the hum under the rusted tracks at night, the beat in his bones when he'd climbed onto the trial mech for the first time, the sound when he'd lucked into that impossible cut through space. Not sound so much as pressure, a pattern behind his heartbeat. He shrugged one shoulder. Just my own blood. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. Let me rephrase. Are you aware of what the Mandate calls the primal rhythm? He frowned. The words tugged at something. Old children's rhymes. Mira singing off-key while they waited in ration lines. The world has a heart, we make it start. No, he said. Never heard of it. The green light on the table flickered faster. Lying. A mechanical voice chimed from the device. He jerked. Shay did not. Relax, she said. It's oversensitive. It hears doubt and calls it deceit. She tapped the casing. The light steadied. Tell me about your sister. Ice slid down his spine. What does she have to do with any of this? Everything, Shay said calmly. Family is leverage. The Mandate prefers to call it stability assurance, but I find clarity helps people cooperate. He stared at her. We have records of one Mira Thorne, she continued. Age 12, no parents on file, dependent on your labor. He pictured Mira in the crowd, scarf ripped away, mouth forming words he couldn't hear. His hands clenched until the cuffs bit. She'll manage, he said, forcing the lie. The device pulsed erratic green. Falsehood detected. Shay tilted her head. Honesty will make your life easier, Mr. Thorne, for you and for her. What are you saying? His voice came out harsher than planned. You going to drag her up here too? Make her an asset? If you cooperate, Shay said evenly, she might instead receive Mandate oversight. Food, education, medical care, a cleaner life than the Rust can offer. We take care of things that belong to us. The word echoed. Belong. He hated that part of him flared at the thought. Mira with enough to eat. Mira without coughs in winter. Mira somewhere with light. She's not a thing, he said. And yet, you are, Shay straightened. Help me understand what you are, and I will recommend favorable treatment. It was not a promise, but it was the only thread in reach. So he spoke. About the instant of tearing sideways, the cold-like memory, the seal of distance collapsing. He tried to describe the pattern under it all, but his words stumbled. Rust metaphors didn't fit well in this sterile room. Shay listened. Sometimes she cut in with a precise question. Were you afraid? Did time seem altered? Did you feel drawn or pushed? She watched his hands when he spoke about the controls, watched his eyes when he groped for language about the dark. At one point, her fingers hovered a moment over his palm, eyes narrowing as if expecting to see marks. There were none, only old scars from scrap metal and the faint indentation where Mira's chalk had once stained. After long minutes, maybe hours, her questions shifted. Before the trial, did you experience any episodes, waking dreams, lost time? Any unexplained injuries? Nosebleeds? Hallucinations of doors where none existed? He almost laughed. The rust was full of hallucinations, smog-thick visions, but nothing like the void. No, he said again. The device hummed, neutral. She moved away, hands clasped behind her back now. Interesting. You are either uniquely gifted or uniquely stupid. Maybe both, he muttered. For the first time, her face cracked enough to show something like actual humor. It vanished quickly. Wait here, she said, as if he had a choice. She turned toward the door. It hissed open before she could reach it. 2 figures entered. One wore the pale blue sash of Mandate Legal. The other had the crest of Academy Research glowing faint on his collar. They stepped around Elias like he was furniture. Their argument had already started before he could turn to follow it. Clearly falls under the Academy's purview, the research officer was saying. Pilot anomalies must be studied in controlled environments. We have the equipment. The mandate does not relinquish primary command and control authorization over combat assets, the legalist snapped. Border security has first claim under the hazard clause. Shay cut in, voice cool but edged. I have already filed under the combat utility and pilot anomaly clause for Dominion rights. This asset performed a void step in live combat. I'm not handing him over for you to vivisect in a lab. Colorful, the legalist said dryly. But Council statute is clear. Earth origin assets require Council approval before off-world transfer. He may not leave the planet. I don't intend to move him off-world, Shay said. Yet, but he will train under my command. The research officer snorted. You want a pet weapon, Captain? How quaint. His readings indicate prime matter saturation levels that could destabilize. That is why he needs a combat framework, not a dissecting table. They circled the table, words like bullets, acronyms and statute numbers rattling around the room. Elias understood only fragments. Section 9, Subdivision C. Council Oversight Board will never approve. Mandate Precedent Case 1477, Rust Sector Anomaly. Numbers flashed on the nearest wall in quiet projections. Graphs, charts. His own code E174K floated above them. None of them used his name. He sat with his hands chained to the floor loop while strangers discussed his destiny as if haggling over a piece of machinery. Now and then, one of the overhead orbs clicked faintly, recording a new angle of their debate. Somewhere, Mira stood in a crowd that had already forgotten him, or was being walked away by someone in a gold uniform who said the right calm words. Belong. The discussion ended without ceremony. Fine, the legalist said. Captain Shay retains Dominion rights, subject to review. Academy research will require regular data feeds, the other protested. You'll get your numbers, Shay said. You always do. She glanced once at Elias then, not soft, but appraising, as if adjusting some private calculation. Remove him to holding, she ordered the guards. Orientation begins at 0600. The cuffs disengaged from the floor. Hands fell on his shoulders again. As they led him out, the bureaucrats' voices faded behind him, drifting into new topics. Quotas, budgets, other assets. He realized with abrupt clarity that if he died here, they would discuss that the same way. Line item, loss percentage, adjusted projections. His life had a column on a spreadsheet now. The dorm cell made the earlier containment room look welcoming. No color, no window, just a narrow bunk built into the wall, a metal shelf that might pretend to be a desk, a recessed panel that served as a door. In the ceiling corner, a single black lens winked red once, then settled to watch. The guards removed his cuffs and left without words. The door sealed with a sigh. For a moment, Elias just stood in the middle of the room and listened to the silence press against his ears. He almost missed the rust's constant noise. Engines backfiring, people shouting, rats skittering. He looked down at his wrists. Faint red bands marked the skin where the restraints had been. Above the left, under the surface, the shard tingled, like a small insect shifting in its burrow. He flexed his fingers. They still remembered the trial's controls, still remembered the feel of Mira's hand when they crossed busy streets, her grip fierce. He sank onto the bunk. The mattress was thin, but softer than anything back home. He would have killed for this level of comfort once. Now it felt like bait. His hands lay palm up on his knees. They looked like someone else's for a second. A pilot's hands, an anomaly's, a property tag's. He curled them into fists. Images broke through the thick numbness. Mira straining against the barricade, her eyes, the blue scarf under the soldier's boot, crushed but still defiant in its color. Guilt came in a slow seep, not a crash. It filled the spaces between his thoughts. He had promised her that winning meant freedom, food, safety, that the mandate needed him enough to give them a better life. Instead, he had given them ownership. What would happen to her now? Would some official knock on their door? Would they even bother? Rest wards weren't on anyone's maps unless they needed bodies. He felt panic rise, a tight burning thing clawing at his chest. The room's walls seemed to lean inward. He forced himself to breathe. In through his nose, out slow. He imagined the air wasn't this sweet filtered stuff, but the familiar burn of rust smog. Imagined the sound of distant trains, the rumble under his feet. Think, he whispered into the empty room. His voice sounded small, flat. If he fought them head on, he'd break on their rules, on their power. That was clear. They owned the sky, the ground, the law. But there were always edges, cracks in the pavement, shadow paths. Back home, he'd survived by learning the rust's rules and then the spaces between them. Where to stand so the cameras glitched, which shifts left blind spots in patrol routes, how to make yourself not worth the trouble. The academy would be no different, just cleaner. He needed to learn every rule here, every ritual, every clause they threw in his face. He needed to play their asset, their anomaly, be useful enough that killing or discarding him cost them more than keeping him alive. And in the quiet between their commands, he would look for a way out. Not just for himself, for Mira. If they touched her, if they used her as a leash, he would endure whatever they threw, walk their void roads again if he had to, step into that thin, cold place and cut his own path. But he would not let them decide who he was inside his own head. He lay down on the bunk, back to the wall, knees drawn up. Not sleeping, just coiling in, compact, animal waiting. The surveillance lens hummed once. He stared back at it, eyes dry. The vow formed without drama. No grand words, just a hard knot in his gut. I will not break. Not for them. If he did, he failed Mira. That was all that mattered. The ceiling above him was a blank, unmarked white. In his mind, a scrap of blue fluttered against it, stubborn and bright. He held that color behind his eyes as the long, artificial night settled over the academy, and the hum of hidden machines became, for now, the only heartbeat.